Hello, this is the second video. What I would like to do today is talk about the 7 characteristics of life. These are going to be 7 characteristics that all life shares on this planet, kind of differentiating maybe what you believe makes something alive from what scientists or the science of biology actually says are conditions for life. This first picture I'd like you to take a look at. This gives you a very small spattering of what is actually alive on the planet, from small things to large things, from animals to plants, to maybe even single-celled. Well, there's multi-single-celled. There's a lot of single cells in this picture, to the multi-celled organisms, unicellular, multicellular. Also giving you a little bit of a tree of life, from bacteria to eukaryotic cells, actually showing you maybe where they branched off to become what they are. And somewhere in here is actually going to be humans. They're going to be this animalia, which can break off into about half of the picture that's in here. Anyway, we think the Earth is about 4.5, 4.6 billion years old. That's 4,500 million to 4,600 million. The Earth was way too hot at this point for life, but within the next billion years or so, somewhere between 3.8 to 3.5 billion years ago, the oceans actually formed, and life probably formed soon after. There was very much an archaic type of life. It was like blue-green algae, which we'll talk about later on. But then with science, where we can talk about things we can prove and disprove, over that 3.5 billion years, things have changed to produce the world that we see around us. Granted, there are a lot of species that have become extinct, a lot more that are going to become extinct, naturally and man-made caused, but we actually probably still have millions of species on the planet today. Okay, before we go any farther, what I want to do is I want to ask you way down here, can you actually tell me what you consider to be the 7 characteristics of life? I'm going to switch over from a mouse to my bamboo pen touch. Can you actually tell me, and I'll stay with a pen and make sure that I've got a color that'll show up. Can you actually tell me what the 7 characteristics of life are? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause right now, and I'm going to let you think about something that you consider to actually make something alive. Okay, I'm going to pause and going to wait patiently. Something I'm not known for is my patience. And I know they do another one of those, but I'm not going to wait that long. Okay, so what do you think the 7 characteristics are? Do you think motion is one of them? Motion is pretty important for lots of things. When we could actually just go in here and check off motion, motion, but what about this thing? And that thing? And that thing? And that thing? Motion is fairly important, but there are lots of life forms that don't seem to move throughout their life. Plants do move back and forth in terms of like air currents, but they don't really move. They can't pick up and walk around like maybe they did in some movies that you've seen. Another thing you might have thought of is oxygen. Oxygen is very important for almost everything in this picture, but there are organisms where oxygen actually is a poison. They're anoxic critters. We actually use some of those for producing food. Yeast does not like oxygen. Oxygen would actually end up killing it. It's an anoxic type environment where they actually live with other chemicals to produce their own energies. Okay, so let's talk about the 7 things. All living things must have these 7 characteristics in common to survive. This was my waiting picture, but I think my video actually pops over the top of it. First one is it's got to be made up of cells. And by definition, cells are capable of change. Cells are the basic unit of life. You have somewhere between 5 and 6 trillion cells to make up your body. There are unicellular creatures. Their cells tend to be really, really, really small. One cell in your body is usually 10 to maybe 100 times bigger than what a bacterial cell, single cell organism are. Cells come from cells, and all living things are composed of cells. And these things can change in the presence of environmental pressures. That means they can evolve. Here is a picture of a large cell, and what happens is the cell actually does get large. At a certain point, the cell becomes too large to allow things to diffuse in, where you get molecules that want to go in, but they can get in. From this one, they could get in all the way, but from here, if I draw the same lines, you can see there is a section that doesn't happen. So when cells actually got bigger, we had to start thinking about other ways of doing things. And there's a process out there which we think is what's called endosymbiosis, where we took an oxygen breathing organism, like a photosynthetic thing, and this is a mitochondria thing, a thing that actually breathes oxygen to produce energy, and then a photosynthetic bacteria, and we pulled in and we made these things part of our cells. Mitochondria actually have two membranes around it, and there are 5 things that actually make mitochondria seem like they used to live outside of a cell and now live inside. The outer membrane around this mitochondria is the type that you'd find in this kind of a cell. It's called a eukaryotic cell, and the inside one is what comes from this kind of a cell, a smaller single cell organism, a prokaryotic cell. So that's 1. 2, it's got its own DNA. There's no other organelle inside of a plant cell or an animal cell that has its own DNA. It has its own ribosomes, but the ribosomes look very much like prokaryotic ribosomes. 1, 2, 3. Well, that's about all I'm going to think about right now. And the other one, that actually goes inside of this type of a cell. And if you take a look at it, they should have these little symbols on them. I don't know whether you can see those or not. This actually increases the surface area inside of mitochondria to let the equations that we'll talk about later on for cellular respiration to actually occur. This is a photosynthetic, sort of like a chloroplast. This is eventually going to become this angular because of the cell wall. They don't have bones. They need to actually have their strength from other ways. But this one actually becomes the plant cell, and this one becomes the animal cell with the mitochondria. They have mitochondria also, but they also have the chloroplasts that are in there. Second thing, I think I can bring it to this point. Second thing is cellular organization or order. Living things are able to organize simple things into complex things. Life's ability to pull things in and to organize is what is a very important consideration in terms of life. You're going to be able to do that as long as you increase your energy supply and you stay alive. The second you die, the material that is you is going to get starting to pull apart. It's going to go back into the state of chaos, which is what the universe tries to do. Life tries to pull things together. The universe tries to pull them apart. But anyway, with this order, what we tend to do is humans can organize cells that are alike into tissues, and they can turn those tissues into organs, and you are just a whole bunch of those. So here are muscle cells, which becomes a smaller part of tissue that's going to make up the stomach. And then these things come together to make, this is stomach lining, to come together to make the stomach, which makes up an organ system, which also has the esophagus, which brings the food from the mouth down to the stomach, and has your small intestine, your large intestine, your colon. So that is an organ system. So we take cells, we move it into tissue, tissues into organs, organs into organ systems, and that's all a form of order. Third thing is regulation. It's really important that organisms are able to keep a steady state. It's called homeostasis. A very important word. In other words, we keep an internal environment. And we do that with chemical equations. And we do that by bringing in materials from the outside. If you ever think about computers, machines, we want to become self-replicating. Life is a self-replicating system. We can take things in that are not alive, sunlight, carbon compounds, and we can turn them into things that are alive, like tissues and organs and whatever else. Okay, so we do have things like carbohydrates. We need water. We need proteins, which are actually made of amino acids. We need lipids, which are the fats, good storage, and also cell membrane type material. And we need nucleic acids to actually store the genetic material that actually you got from your parents and you're going to give to your offspring, your kids. Okay, so these are the chemicals of life, and these are used to control the internal environment, which is what's called homeostasis. One situation. Number 4 is energy processing. Living things use energy to repair and function. Actually repair, replace, and function. Your brain cells hopefully are using energy right now. Here's a cartoon of a brain. I'm actually dividing it up into two sides with bridges going one way, and you can see the blue guy is actually moving over here, turning green. Supposedly these colorful people are going to go back over for blue. This is the math and quantity side, so science spends a lot of time over here, and this is the art, music side. Okay, so that's processing energy. Also response to the environment. Living things react to where they live. Sunshine, sunlight, temperature, air, oxygen content, air pressure, other things. And we can actually change because of this environment. Populations evolve over time. Individuals usually do not, but we can move around because we've got the feet and we've got brains to notice it. So if we actually find out it gets too hot, we can move to some place where it's not as hot. Populations can evolve over time. Plants respond. Here's a plant with aphids. This is an adult aphid. And here's a little baby aphid. Aphids actually go through something called incomplete metamorphism, where they actually get to a certain size and then they actually crack open their outside because their external skeleton. They actually crack open the outside by puffing up the inside, and then they crawl out of that one skin and then puff up their body, and the outside turns hard again. With chitin, it's actually the same thing your fingernails are made out of. And they'll stay in there for a while, and they'll actually do the same thing until they get to the size of an adult, and then they can actually replicate and have their own little babies. But this plant is actually emitting material that the aphid actually finds, and then they come and they put their proboscis, their little mouth part, into it, and they suck out the sweet material of the plant. The plant also can actually put material, they can actually react to the aphid. They can put materials, chemical materials inside their stems to make them not taste as well, and that may actually drive off the aphid. Some of them can actually put in a pesticide to actually kill the aphid. But either way, we're driving it away. The aphids put out a little pheromone, which the ladybug, this is probably a Japanese ladybug, but this ladybug actually finds, and ladybugs are really good at eating aphids, which means that very good biological control, much better than actually putting poisons on the plant. Just go to a plant store, and you can probably buy 100 ladybugs, let them loose, and they'll demolish your aphid population. Growth and development. This is an example of complete metamorphism, where we actually start with an egg, and within 5 or 10 days the egg hatches, gives to the larval, the worm stage, the caterpillar stage, and they can actually stay, and you can see it molts 5 to 6 times. They do the same thing. They puff up their body, they crack open the outer part of the shell, they pop out of it, they puff themselves up bigger, and the outside becomes hard. They do that 5 or 6 times, then they move into a totally different format, the pupa case, where they change from a worm into the beautiful butterfly. And in terms of a monarch, this is called a chrysalis, and you can see there's a chrysalis in there that hasn't hatched, and this is the one this monarch came out, and it'll just pump up its wings, they'll dry out, and it'll fly away and keep perpetuating the species. Growth and development It's very important for organisms to grow and develop, which is what that thing over there was supposed to be with the monarch. And the last thing is reproduction. Once the butterfly gets big enough, the aphid gets big enough, all the other critters in the top picture, the giraffe, this plant, or these single-celled microorganisms, when they get big enough, they've got to duplicate. They've got to take their genetic material and give it off to another critter. And bacteria does it by all kinds of new fission is what this one, actually fission's not even in here. Fission, that's another way that the mitochondria is sort of like bacterial. It reproduces by fission. What happens is one bacteria starts getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and when it gets to a certain size, it cleaves. We'll talk about cleavage furrow, and it starts to cleave, and this thing actually gives rise to two totally different critters, which will enlarge and cleave and break apart. But the DNA, which is in here, and it's actually a circular DNA, different than what our DNA is like, or what eukaryotic cells. But the prokaryotic cell, it has to actually replicate, so we get a ring of DNA in each one of these, so that it can do the same thing when it actually starts cleaving to make the next generation. Some plants can also, this is asexual. Some plants can do sexual reproduction where they've got pollen and eggs, and the bees can carry the pollen, or the wind can carry the pollen, or people can pollinate and actually give half of the material from the mom plant to half the material of the dad plant, and actually come up with a brand new plant. But plants can also reproduce asexually, where if the leaf of the plant actually comes in contact with the ground, it can start actually making a new plant, and there will be roots going down in here. And then when this actually gets big enough, this leaf may die or disappear. We have two totally different plants, but the DNA of this one is exactly like the DNA in this one. And then we have what's called sexual reproduction, where if this is mom is signified by that shape, could also be dad, we can't tell. But if this is mom, she gave half of her DNA, dad mated with mom, gave half the DNA to make the baby, and the baby's one half mom and one half dad. And that is sexual reproduction. Okay, that's it. Thank you much. Next thing is this is actually the characteristics of life, 7 things that make up life. Next thing we'll talk about the characters of life. Thank you much. Bye.